another episode in our criminal calendar. I have to tell you that I feel like a particular moron today because our guest, Daniel Silva, is a television professional. Hi, Daniel.
Hi, how are you? Why do you feel like a moron?
Well, I think that to invite somebody who did programming for CNN to be my guest on cable television.
I was at CNN. I was not a pioneer. I was not one of the founding fathers, but I did come to CNN, I guess 8 years into this great experiment known as all-news cable television. And, you know, we did things on the cheap compared to the networks, too. So, not to say that this is on the cheap, but it was not always a bed of roses there. It's a lot better now.
I wish that in my literary life I actually had time to occasionally watch television or even go to the movies, but I find that the book world, to do my load of it, it's just overwhelming. So if I make any, you know, sort of fluffs about television, I hope you'll forgive me. But you, if I remember right, you actually started off in journalism, and you were at San Francisco State.
I was in graduate school at San Francisco State, and the Democratic Convention was coming to town, and United Press International offered me a 6-week temporary job. They had to have some grunts to do all the silly stuff while the staffers were working on the convention. And I got that 6-week temporary job, and at the end of it, they hired me full time. And so I didn't finish graduate school. I took the job, and then a short time later, I was offered a second job at the Peninsula Times-Tribune in Palo Alto. So I would work 6 to 2 in San Francisco, get on Highway 101, go down the peninsula, work 4 to midnight at the Peninsula Times-Tribune. So that's how I started my career.
You know, I was an undergraduate in Palo Alto. I can hardly remember the Peninsula Times-Tribune.
It was a small paper based in Palo Alto. It folded at least 10 years ago. It was done under by the success of the San Jose paper, the Mercury News. Sort of crushed it. But it was a small, feisty Palo Alto, but it covered all the peninsula, all those suburbs down there. And so I had my foot in. I was just so excited to have a job, I took them both.
I can well imagine. And then what? You went to Washington.
I went to Washington. I was transferred to the foreign desk in Washington for UPI, and I worked there for a couple of years. And in 1987, I was sent overseas and worked in the Middle East for a couple of years.
Were you in Cairo then?
I was in Cairo. I was based in Cairo. Lived in an apartment overlooking the Nile. It was a big, filthy, crowded, overcrowded mess, and I just adored it. I really loved Cairo. But I was also living part-time in the Persian Gulf, covering the Iran-Iraq War from time to time. So I sort of went back and forth between the two places. And while I was in the Persian Gulf, I met my wife-to-be, who is Jamie Gangel of NBC News. And one of us had to move, and it wasn't going to be her. And so I came back to Washington and went to work for CNN.
I asked you in part because so far you haven't had a whole book, at least, set in Cairo.
I am writing at least one more of the series that I'm working on, but I am stewing over a novel set in Cairo. I think it's sort of a perfect stage for a novel that I'm thinking about the Islam and our war on terror and some things like that. Early notion is what I would call it, but I do want to go back there and set a novel in Cairo.
Yeah, it seems a shame to waste the experience, especially if you liked it. I mean, I've heard conflicting reports. We've had a number of authors who spent time in Cairo. Most seem to love it. If you have been repelled.
Well, I loved it, but it was hard to live there. We were sick all the time, the foreign correspondents. I mean, you would go to a cocktail party and people would just stand around, you know, discussing the latest gastrointestinal ailment from which they were suffering.
We're just all like the hospital.
We're all out in the open with it. But it was fascinating, and it was not a time when I never felt any anti-Americanism there. I would hang out with my office boys. They would take me into the crummiest coffee houses and tea houses, and we'd play backgammon all night, and it was great. I think it has changed a great deal in the wake of. I do, and Egypt has had its own, obviously a lot of Islamic violence there. There was this terrible massacre in Upper Egypt of the tourists a few years ago, and a lot of people don't really realize how much Al-Qaeda is born of that Egyptian tradition. The number 2 man to Osama bin Laden is an Egyptian. Ayman Zawahiri comes from Egypt. So it's a little bit dicey these days, I think.
And yet Egypt has a really strong Christian tradition, the whole Coptic Church.
It's an oppressed, and they enjoy second-class status for the most part, and they live in fear. In a lot of places, just as the Jewish community did that existed there before they were expelled. But it is this, in a lot of ways, the center of the Muslim world. Al-Azhar University is the great Muslim university, and it envelops you when you're there. I mean, Islam is everywhere. You fall into the daily rhythm of the prayers and the Muslim Sabbath, and it's quite something.
Now that you have swum into my ken, so to speak, we published a series, Poison Pen Press, by Michael Pearson, English author, called The Mamre Zapt.
Okay.
There's a whole bunch, and they are very much in the same sort of style that you write, I think. I love them. They're set in the Egyptian Protectorate, and the series is going to come to its natural end with the end of the First World War. They won a lot of awards, and I think they are very intelligent. They're also a great way for people who want to understand some of the Middle East today, to go back and look at some of the roots of how the West interfaced in the late 19th, early 20th century, with Egypt.
And right after that came the birth of a group that would change the face of the Middle East, and that's the Muslim Brotherhood. They come out of Egypt in the 20s. They're formed there. And this Islamic fundamentalism or Islamic extremism, if you will, is an Egyptian product. It was born in Egypt in that period between the wars, and has obviously had a great impact on the face of the Middle East.
Well, I can imagine that a book that you will write about this will be a real, well, I can't wait to read it. But enough of that. Let's talk about books you've actually written, just to get us going here.
Okay.
The Unlikely Spy, your first novel. What induced you to write fiction? Was it kind of a relief, in fact, from all the news coverage?
I always wanted to be a writer, and I grew up reading Alistair MacLean and guys like that, Eric Ambler. I took all my dad's books, Jack Higgins, and I always wanted to write thrillers. And I went into journalism because I thought it would be good training in the art of storytelling and would provide me with some interesting experiences, and that turned out to be the case. And I was at CNN, and I had moved into a sort of a management position. I was in charge of the unit that produced all of the political talk shows, Crossfire, Capital Gang, Late Edition, Inside Politics. I was running this menagerie filled with, Patrick Buchanan and Michael Kinsley and Robert Novak and Jesse Jackson. These guys worked for me, worked with them every day. And I wasn't writing anymore, no more news writing, and I felt it was time to try. And I wanted to get as far away from my job as possible. And so every morning for a year or so, I went down and wrote before work, and that was the end result of it.
What was the background you chose for An Unlikely Spy? Or is it The Unlikely Spy?
The Unlikely Spy.
The Unlikely Spy.
Well, it's set in England on the eve of D-Day, and it involves a plot to steal a little-known secret of the Normandy invasion. That was the plan to build artificial harbors to ferry supplies and tanks and machinery ashore after the invasion started.